On the luxurious penthouse floor of one of Brazil's most expensive buildings, a Russian millionaire paced nervously around his marble-clad office. His ice-blue eyes reflected the loneliness of a man who had everything except true love. "Who will love me for something other than money?" he muttered in Russian, unaware that the cleaning lady, who had been pretending not to understand his language for months, would respond fluently. "The one who sees your heart, not your bank account." The silence cut through the air like a knife. And you, where are you watching this impossible love story that will turn your night upside down? Leave your city in the comments, subscribe to the channel, and leave your like to receive the next chapter. Viktor Petrov, an oil tycoon with $1 billion fortune, paced nervously around his marble-clad office. His ice-blue eyes reflected an anguish that money had never been able to cure. The absolute loneliness of a man who had everything except true love. On that cold winter morning, as he watched the Sao Paulo drizzle dance outside the window, he murmured in Russian a question that had haunted his soul for decades. "Who will love me, and who will love me not for the money in the corner of the room?" A voice as soft as wild honey replied fluently, "Anatovskiot, the one who sees your heart, not your bank account." Victor turned in astonishment. There was Ania Volkova, the 28-year-old cleaning lady who had been cleaning his office for 6 months. Her brown hair tied back in a simple bun, wearing her faded blue uniform, but with eyes that sparkled with a deep intelligence he had never noticed before. The silence cut through the air like a blade. Victor, accustomed to commanding empires and negotiating with presidents, was speechless before this simple woman, who not only understood Russian perfectly, but had responded with a wisdom that touched his wounded soul. You speak Russian?" he stammered in his native tongue, his right hand instinctively clutching the gold pen he was holding. Anania smiled sadly. "I have a degree in Russian literature from the University of St. Petersburg. I came to Brazil fleeing family problems and work as a cleaning lady to survive." The expression on Victor's face changed. His eyebrows rose and a mixture of surprise and intrigue danced across his normally impassive countenance. There was something about this woman, something he couldn't quite put his finger on, but which aroused an almost painful curiosity in his chest. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" he asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. "No one ever asked," she replied simply, returning to cleaning the shelves of rare books. And so, with this simple exchange of words, Viktor Petrov's world began to crumble and rebuild itself simultaneously, like a house of cards blown by the wind of fate. The next morning, Victor arrived early at the office, something he never did. He found Anya organizing her collection of first editions of Russian classics. "Pushkin," she commented without turning around, recognizing his heavy footsteps. "Your collection is impressive." Victor approached slowly, as one would approach a rare bird that could fly away at any moment. "Do you know it well?" Hanya finally turned around, and for a moment Victor saw something in her eyes, a spark of fierce intelligence and perhaps a closely guarded secret. "I know every word. I ever burn." My thesis was about his influence on the construction of modern Russian identity. The tycoon swallowed hard. For months he had talked to executives in Russian in front of Anania, revealing his deepest fears, his insecurities about being loved only for his wealth, his nighttime tears of loneliness. And she had listened to everything in silence, cleaning around him like an invisible angel who knew every scar on his soul. "Why did you come to Brazil?" The question escaped his lips before he could hold it back. Anania's delicate fingers trembled slightly as she replaced a book on the shelf. "To escape," she replied simply. Then, after a meaningful pause, "My father wanted me to marry the son of an oligarch, a man I despised." Victor felt something strange in his chest, a mixture of empathy and suspicion. For some reason he couldn't explain, he felt there was more to this story. "And why do you work as a cleaner?" With her education, Anania smiled, but it was a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Sometimes, Viktor Alexeyevich, the best way to hide is to be in plain sight. No one looks at a cleaning lady. No one sees her." "I'm seeing you now," he replied, his voice suddenly hoarse. Their eyes met. Something invisible and powerful passed between them. An electric current of recognition between two lonely souls, identifying each other in the vast ocean of humanity. At that moment, Victor's cell phone rang, breaking the spell. It was his assistant, reminding him of the meeting with international investors. When he hung up and turned to continue the conversation, Anaya had quietly disappeared, leaving only the subtle scent of jasmine in the air and a disturbing question in Victor's mind. Who was this woman who cleaned his office? 3 days passed without Victor seeing Anania again. His office remained impeccably clean every morning, but she seemed to be deliberately avoiding him. Her absence affected him more than he cared to admit. He found himself looking at the door several times a day, hoping to see her come in with her cleaning cart and her restrained smile. On Friday, determined to find her, Victor canceled all his meetings and arrived at the office before dawn. He sat in the dim light waiting. At 5:30 a.m., he heard the soft click of the door. Hanya entered silently, her movements as graceful as a ballerina's. Victor turned on the small lamp on his desk. "Good morning, Ania Volkova." She startled, but quickly regained her composure. "Mr. Petrov, I didn't expect to see you here so early. I'm full of surprises, just like you, apparently." Anya placed the cleaning cart in the corner of the room and crossed her arms defensively. "What do you want? Dinner with me tonight?" The proposal hung in the air, fragile, iridescent, and laden with possibilities. "That would be inappropriate," she finally replied, though Victor noticed the hesitation in her voice. "Oui, ma'am, we're just two people who enjoy Russian literature and good conversation." He stood up and approached her. "If it's not a date, Anya, it's a chance to talk as equals, not as boss and employee." A visible conflict arose on her face. Desire versus reason, curiosity versus caution. Her fingers played nervously with the hem of her uniform. "Dinner," she finally agreed, "in a public place, of course." Victor smiled, feeling a wave of triumph he hadn't experienced since his first big deals. "I'll send a car to pick you up at 8. As he turned to leave, her voice stopped him, soft but firm. "No, Victor, I'll meet you there. Send me the address by text." He turned slowly, surprised by her firmness. Their eyes met again, and Victor saw something that intrigued him. An inner strength, an iron determination that seemed disproportionate for a simple cleaning lady. "As you wish," he finally replied, sensing that he was facing a much more complex puzzle than he had initially imagined. And as he watched Ania calmly return to her work, he couldn't help but wonder if he was walking toward redemption or an elegantly constructed trap. The restaurant Victor chose was at the top of a historic building in downtown Sao Paulo. Discreet, elegant, with a panoramic view of the city. He arrived 20 minutes early, something unheard of for a man who was used to making others wait. When Ania entered, he almost didn't recognize her. The faded blue uniform had been replaced by a simple but elegant emerald green dress that highlighted her golden brown eyes. Her hair, usually tied back, fell in soft waves over her shoulders. She wore no jewelry except for a small amber pendant. Victor stood up, feeling his heart beat strangely fast. "You look different," she added with a shy smile. "Stunning," he corrected, pulling out a chair for her. Dinner began with palpable tension, but as the wine glasses were filled and emptied, the conversation flowed more naturally. They talked about Tolstoy and Tov, about the colors of autumn in St. Petersburg, about the intensity of Brazilian life compared to Russian melancholy. "How does someone with your talent and education end up cleaning offices in Brazil?" Victor finally asked, putting into words the question that tormented him. Anania played with the rim of her wine glass, her fingers tracing invisible circles. "Sometimes we run away so quickly that we don't have time to plan our destination." Victor leaned forward. "What exactly did you run away from, Anania?" A heavy silence fell over the table. Outside, the city lights twinkled like fallen stars. Finally, Anania looked up, and Victor saw in her eyes a sadness so deep that he felt as if he were looking into an abyss. "My father is Dmitry Volkov." The name hit Victor like a punch. Dmitry Volkov, his biggest rival in business. The man who had sworn to destroy him after Victor had acquired his company in an aggressive maneuver 5 years ago. Volkov repeated mechanically, feeling the blood freeze in his veins. "You are Dmitry Volkov's daughter," and Nia felt it without looking away. "Now you understand why I had to run away. Because I couldn't use my real name." Victor's mind was working at a frantic pace. It was too much of a coincidence. Han, his enemy's daughter, working as a cleaner in his office, knowing his secrets, his weaknesses. His fears whispered in Russian on lonely nights. "Your father sent you," he said, the words coming out like stones from his mouth, "to spy on me, to destroy me." Ananias did not respond immediately. He took a sip of wine, his eyes never leaving her. When he spoke, his voice was calm, almost resigned. Yes, that was the original mission. Victor's world collapsed with those words. He felt betrayed, manipulated, used, just as he had always feared. "And then?" his voice asked, dangerously controlled. "And then I met you," she replied simply. "Not the Victor Petrov of the tabloids and business magazines. Not the ruthless oligarch who destroyed my father, but the man who cries in Russian when he thinks no one is listening. The man who asks the void who could love him beyond his money." Their eyes met across the table, and Victor felt the ground open up beneath his feet. He was standing on the edge of a precipice. Trusting her meant possibly walking toward his own destruction. But for the first time in decades, he felt that someone really saw him. "Why are you telling me this now?" he asked, his voice betraying his inner turmoil. Ananias reached out across the table, her fingers almost touching his, but not quite. "Because I can't go on with this lie anymore. Because I need you to know who I really am before." "Before what, Ananias?" Victor insisted, leaning forward. At that moment, her cell phone vibrated. Hania looked at the screen and paled visibly. Her eyes, when they met Victor's, were filled with fear. "He's here," she whispered. "My father is in Sao Paulo." Victor didn't sleep that night. After the tumultuous dinner, he had taken Ania to her apartment, a simple place in the Liberdade neighborhood, populated mainly by students and immigrants. The distance between that small apartment and his luxury penthouse couldn't be greater, not just in meters, but in worlds. "Are you safe here?" he asked, looking at the simple lock on the door. "For now," she replied with a sad smile. "We need to talk tomorrow, Victor. There's a lot more you need to know." Now, as the sun rose over Sao Paulo, Victor stared at the city through the window of his penthouse, mentally reviewing every interaction with Ania over the past few months. Every word, every glance, every silence, all now reinterpreted in the light of revelation. His cell phone rang. It was Sergei, his head of security. "Sir, we have confirmed Dmitry Volkov's presence in the city. He arrived last night on the flight from Frankfurt and is staying at the Copacabana Palace." Victor closed his eyes, feeling his jaw tense, suspicious movements. He met with Brazilian investors this morning. He also made contact with Paulo Mendes. The name made Victor grip the phone tightly. Mendes was his main competitor in Brazil, waiting for years for a chance to weaken him, keep him under surveillance, but at a distance. "And Sergei, don't let him out of your sight." After hanging up, Victor remained motionless for a few minutes, then made a decision. He grabbed his car keys, not the Bentley his driver drove, but the old Volvo he kept for rare occasions when he wanted to go unnoticed. It was time to find out who Ania Evkova really was. The Liberdade neighborhood was slowly waking up when Victor parked near Ananias' building. He decided to wait in the car, watching the entrance. At 7:15 a.m., she came out wearing simple jeans and a white blouse, her hair tied back in a casual ponytail. She looked younger, more vulnerable. Victor hesitated, then got out of the car and followed her discreetly. Rand walked with determined steps, occasionally looking back as if afraid of being followed. She entered a small cafe with Japanese decor and sat down at a table in the back. 10 minutes later, Victor froze. A tall, gray-haired man in an impeccable suit entered the cafe and headed for Ananias' table. Even from a distance, Victor would recognize him anywhere. Dmitry Volkov, his arch-rival, the man who had sworn revenge against him. Father and daughter stared at each other for long seconds without embracing. The conversation seemed tense, with restrained but intense gestures. From his vantage point across the street, Victor couldn't hear what they were saying, but the body language was clear. There was conflict, urgency, perhaps even fear. Suddenly, Volkov slammed his hand on the table, making the cups jump. Hania remained impassive, staring at him firmly. The man leaned in, whispering something that made his eyes widen. Then he stood up abruptly and left, passing a few feet from where Victor was hiding. Victor waited a few minutes, watching Hania remain seated, staring at her cup with a lost expression. Then, making an impulsive decision, he crossed the street and entered the cafe. Pleasant family reunion? He asked, sitting down in the chair Volkov had just vacated. Anania looked up, not at all surprised to see him. You followed me and you met the man who swore to destroy me. He is my father and he is also my enemy. Anania sighed deeply, rubbing her temples. Did you hear our conversation? I didn't need to. Body language said it all. She studied his face for a moment, as if trying to decipher a complex code. He wants me to continue, Victor. He wants me to extract information about his new acquisition in Asia, the contract with the Chinese government. The revelation hit Victor like a bucket of cold water. That contract, still confidential, could change the balance of power in the Asian energy market. What if Volkov got that information before the official announcement? And what did you say? She asked, her voice betraying her attention. Inananya reached out across the table and this time her fingers touched his. A touch as light as a feather, but one that sent an electric current through his entire body. I said no, she replied simply. I said I wouldn't continue with it, that it was over. Victor studied her face, looking for signs of a lie. Why? Why? She hesitated, her eyes shining with what could have been restrained tears. Because I can no longer pretend that I don't care, that you're just a target, that this is just a job. The cafe around them disappeared. The outside world dissolved. At that moment, there were only two human beings connected by something as fragile and powerful as the thread of life. What happens now? Asked Victor, surprised by the vulnerability in his own voice. Before Anya could answer, her cell phone vibrated. She looked at the message and her face paled. We have to go, she said urgently. Now, what happened? Anania was already on her feet, pulling him by the arm. My father won't take no for an answer. He never has. The rain fell mercilessly when they arrived at the small farm on the outskirts of Sao Paulo. The property, hidden among dense trees and protected by a discreet gate, belonged to Helena, the only friend Anya had made in Brazil. She's traveling, Ania explained as she unlocked the door to the simple but cozy house. Tell her we can stay here as long as we need to. Victor looked around curiously, so different from his usual surroundings, with rustic furniture, colorful rugs, and an atmosphere of calm he had never found in his impeccably decorated mansions. My father won't give up easily, said Anania, putting down the small suitcase they had picked up at his apartment. He sees this as a betrayal, not only to him, but to the family, to the legacy. Victor approached the window, watching the rain transform the garden into a melancholic scene. He knows about us. He knows I stopped sending information. He suspects I've developed feelings. She paused as if carefully choosing her next words. Doesn't he know I told you everything? Silence settled between them, filled only by the rhythmic sound of rain on the roof. Victor turned, facing her directly. For how long, Anania? How long have you been watching me? Writing down my words, reporting my movements. She held his gaze without flinching. 6 months since the first day. And when did that change? Anania approached slowly, stopping a few steps away from him. Do you remember that day 3 months ago when you received the news about your mother? You were alone in your office, crying, looking at that old photograph. Victor felt a lump in his throat. His mother, the only person who had loved him unconditionally, had died in St. Petersburg. He hadn't been able to attend the funeral. Complicated political issues prevented him from returning to Russia. You came into the office, when he recalled. His voice was hoarse. I brought tea. I didn't say anything. That night, Anania continued, I called my father and lied for the first time. I said you showed no emotion, that you were as cold as the Russian winter. I couldn't do it. I couldn't convey that pain, so private, so genuine. A single tear rolled down her cheek, and Victor felt something break inside him, a wall he had built over decades. Since then, she continued, I have been sabotaging my own mission, sending incomplete, altered information, making up excuses, and hating myself more and more every day for the lie I was living. Victor closed the distance between them, touching her face gently, drying the tear with his thumb. Why didn't you just leave? You could have disappeared. Anania closed her eyes briefly, leaning almost imperceptibly against his hand. Because every day being by your side, even as an invisible shadow, became more precious than any freedom away from you. The world stopped spinning for a moment. There in that simple house, under the patter of rain, two wounded and imperfect human beings saw each other completely for the first time without masks, without pretense, just in their raw vulnerability. Victor leaned in slowly, giving her all the time in the world to pull away. Anania didn't. When their lips met, it was as if something primordial had finally found its place in the universe. The soft kiss initially deepened with a long-held hunger. When they finally separated, breathless, Victor rested his forehead against hers. "I trust you," he whispered, the words coming from somewhere deep inside him. "God help me, but I trust you." Before Anaya could respond, the crash of a car braking sharply on the gravel outside broke the spell. Her eyes widened in panic. "He found us," she whispered. Anania's heart raced as flashlight beams illuminated the windows of the house. Victor pulled her away from the door, instinctively placing himself between her and the impending danger. "How did he find us so quickly?" Victor muttered, his mind rapidly calculating the options. Anya felt a wave of cold understanding wash over her. "My cell phone," she whispered. "He had access to it from the beginning." The knock on the door was authoritative, unmistakable. "Anya Volkova, I know you're in there. Open the door." Dmitry Volkov's voice, even muffled by the door in the rain, carried an authority that Anya knew all too well. She felt like the frightened little girl from St. Petersburg again, always trying to please an impossible father. "I won't let him hurt you," Victor promised, his blue eyes shining with iron determination. "Victor, she touched your arm. I know my father. We need to face him, not run away." The knocking on the door grew louder, more insistent. "30 seconds, Hania, or I'll break down this door." Hania took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and walked toward the entrance. Victor followed close behind, tension emanating from him in palpable waves. When she opened the door, the sight of her father drenched by the rain, his face contorted in a mixture of fury and disappointment, hit her like a physical blow. Behind him, two huge men stood waiting, his usual bodyguards. "Father?" she said simply. Volkov's eyes, so similar to his own, narrowed dangerously when he saw Victor. "So it's true, you betrayed your family for him." The last word came out like poison from his lips. "There was no betrayal, Dmitri," Victor interjected, his voice surprisingly calm. "Only humanity." Volkov took a step forward, water streaming down his stern face. "Humanity? You speak of humanity, Petrov? After destroying everything I built, after humiliating me before the business world? It was a legitimate acquisition," Victor replied. "You were in debt. Your company was sinking. It was my family's legacy." Volkov roared, a vein throbbing in his neck. "The inheritance that was supposed to pass to my daughter before you showed up with your American lawyers and your dirty tactics." Anya stepped forward, placing herself between the two men. "Enough, both of you, enough." The silence that followed was heavy as lead. Only the sound of the rain persisted, indifferent to the human drama. "What did you want, Father?" Anania finally asked. "For me to manipulate Victor, steal his trade secrets, destroy his company as he destroyed yours, and then that would bring peace to all of us." Volkova stared at her, surprised by her firmness. For a moment, Ania glimpsed something in his eyes, perhaps respect or just astonishment at her defiance. "You don't understand, Anania. I understand this man perfectly well," she interrupted. "I understand that you have never been able to separate business from your personal life, that for you a commercial defeat is a mortal offense for which you are willing to use your own daughter as a pawn in a game of revenge." The words hung in the air like shards of glass. Volkov blinked as if he had been slapped. "Everything I did," he said, his voice suddenly lower, "it was to protect you, to secure your future." "No, Father," Ania replied gently. "It was to protect your pride. And now I need to protect something more important, my integrity." Victor approached, placing his hand gently on Anania's shoulder. The simple but intimate gesture did not go unnoticed by Volkov. His face hardened again. "So you really fell in love with him," he said, not as a question, but as a bitter statement. Anania did not flinch from his gaze. "Yes, I fell in love with the man, not the tycoon, not the rival, but the human being I saw beyond the headlines and reports you made me memorize. And you, Petrovio?" Volkov turned to Victor, his eyes flashing with restrained fury. Do you also love my daughter, or is she just another trophy? Another acquisition for your collection? The question hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Anania felt her heart race, realizing that they had never spoken explicitly about love, only about trust, about connection. Victor looked first at her, then at Volkov. When I met your daughter, Dmitri, I didn't meet Ania Volkova, heir to the empire I acquired. I met Ania, the woman who saw through me when no one else could. And yes, I fell in love with her, not for revenge, not for triumph, but because, for the first time in decades, I didn't feel alone. The simple but profound words had an unexpected effect. Dmitry Volkov took a step back, visibly shaken. This is madness, he muttered, but the conviction had diminished in his voice. It's life, father, Ania replied softly, unpredictable and logical, sometimes cruel, sometimes wonderful, as she always had been. A tense silence settled, broken only by the rain that was beginning to ease. Finally, Volkov gestured sharply to his security guards, who retreated to the car. This isn't over, he said, looking directly at Victor, then turning to Anania, his face softening almost imperceptibly. Be careful, daughter. Not all fairy tales have happy endings. As they watched the car drive away down the muddy road, Victor held Anania's hand tightly. He'll be back, he said softly. Yes, she agreed, leaning back against his chest, but not today. And today is all we can be sure of. A week had passed since the confrontation with Dmitri. Victor and Anania had returned to Sao Paulo, but nothing was as it had been before. The corporate world was abuzz with rumors about the powerful Viktor Petrov and the mysterious Russian woman who had suddenly appeared in his life. I don't care what they say, Victor said, snapping shut the tablet where he had been reading the latest sensational headlines. They were on the terrace of his penthouse, breakfast nestled between them. Ania smiled sadly. She should care. An oil magnate seduced by a Russian spy is not exactly good for his stock. Victor shrugged, a strangely casual gesture for a man who was normally so controlled. My stock will survive. But Anania knew it wasn't that simple. On the streets, she felt the stares, the whispers. In the building elevator, the sudden coldness of neighbors who had been cordial in the restaurant the night before. The maitre d' discreetly seating them at the farthest table, as if they were carriers of some contagious disease. What did your board say? She asked, referring to the emergency meeting Victor had had the day before. He hesitated, his fingers drumming on the marble table. They're concerned about the stability of the company, about public perception. They want you to distance yourself from me, Ania translated, always direct. Victor didn't deny it, but his eyes fixed on hers with intensity. I haven't decided my personal life by board vote until today. I won't start now. Anania stood up and walked to the edge of the terrace. Below, Sao Paulo pulsed, indifferent to individual dramas. She felt Victor approach from behind, his strong hands resting gently on her shoulders. What are you thinking about? He asked. How ironic it is, she replied, without turning around. My father sent me to destroy him, but he ended up destroying me too. Now we are both outcasts. Victor turned her gently, forcing her to face him. You are not an outcast, Anania. You are the most courageous and upright woman I have ever known. She smiled sadly. Says the man who met me when I was living an elaborate lie. I met you through the lie, he corrected. I saw the real you when you decided to abandon it. The moment was interrupted by Victor's cell phone. He answered with visible irritation, but his expression quickly turned to alarm. What? When? His eyes met Anania's. I'll be there in 20 minutes. What happened? She asked as soon as he hung up. Sergei replied, Victor, referring to his head of security. Your father met with the Securities and Exchange Commission this morning and with Paulo Mendez shortly after. Anania felt the blood run cold in her veins. The CVM was the Brazilian equivalent of the American SEC, the highest authority in financial market regulation. He's going to try to destroy you in another way, she murmured. Legally, Victor was already getting the upper hand. I need to go to the company. Stay here. It's safer. No. Anania held his arm firmly. We're in this together. Besides, she added with a determined gleam in her eyes, no one knows my father's tactics better than I do. In the car, on the way to Petrovia Energia's headquarters, Ania watched Victor's tense profile. What do you think he's doing? Probably reporting alleged irregularities in the acquisition of the Chinese subsidiary. It's our most recent operation, not yet fully consolidated. Ananias thought for a moment. That doesn't make sense. My father doesn't have access to internal documents on that operation. The look Victor gave her contained an unspoken question. She replied firmly, I never sent him any documents about it. He's bluffing. When they arrived at the imposing Petrov Energia building, the receptionist seemed surprised to see Veronia. In the elevator, executives cast curious glances, some openly hostile. I shouldn't have brought her, Victor muttered. You should have thought of that before, she replied with an enigmatic smile. In the meeting room, the entire board awaited them, 10 men and 2 women, all with serious expressions. Victor made the introduction succinctly. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Ania Volkova, daughter of Dmitry Volkov, added Jorge Sampaio, the chairman of the board. Without standing up, the woman who is causing the biggest corporate scandal of the year. Ania was not intimidated. She walked calmly to the table and sat down in the only empty chair next to Victor. I am also the woman who can save your company, she replied calmly. If you allow me. A murmur ran through the room. Victor gave her a surprised look, but quickly recovered. Ania knows her father's tactics well and has information that can help us. With all due respect, CFO Marcia Diaz interjected, how can we trust someone who admitted to being sent to spy on our company? The question hung in the air like smoke. Anaya maintained her composure, looking directly into the executive's eyes. I'm not asking you to trust me, Ms. Diaz. I only ask that you listen to me, then you decide. Over the next hour, Anaya detailed her father's usual tactics, the weaknesses he would likely try to exploit, the allies he would surely recruit. She spoke with the precision of someone who knew her subject deeply, without emotion, just facts. When she finished, the silence in the room was different, no longer hostile, but thoughtful. If what you say is true, Sampaio finally said, we have a chance to anticipate his moves. It's true, Ania said simply. Victor looked around the table, assessing each face. We need a plan, and we need it now. As the strategic discussion began, Anania noticed that something had subtly changed in the atmosphere. It wasn't complete acceptance, nor was it unconditional trust, but it was a start, a space where she could prove her worth, not as a spy, not as Volkov's daughter, not as Petrov's lover, but as herself, Ania Volkova, with her own brilliant mind and her own newly discovered integrity. And for the first time since this whole storm had begun, she felt a glimmer of hope for the future. The sun was setting over Sao Paulo when the meeting finally ended. Han watched the board members leave one by one, some still casting suspicious glances her way, others now curious, even respectful. Victor remained seated, reorganizing papers, his face revealing his accumulated fatigue. You were brilliant, he said finally when they were alone. Anya smiled modestly. I just did what was necessary. No, Victor stood up, approaching her. You did much more than that. You faced a group of corporate sharks without flinching. You earned their respect. That's extraordinary. She felt the heat rise to her face at the sincere compliment. It was strange how his words had such power over her. She who had grown up being praised by oligarchs and politicians since childhood. Will the plan work? She asked, changing the subject. Victor sighed, running his hand through his gray hair at his temples. If your father is really trying to discredit the acquisition of South China Energy. Yes, but your father is like a fox, cunning, unpredictable, and vindictive, added Anya, remembering the endless nights she had heard Dmitry Volkov swear revenge against his enemies. A comfortable silence settled between them. Outside, the city lights began to sparkle like diamonds scattered on black velvet. Let's have dinner, Victor suddenly proposed at home. Without restaurants, without stairs, without gossip. Anaya felt a shiver of pleasure at the word home, a concept that had become fluid in her life of exile and escape. Dinner was simple but intimate. In the spacious kitchen of Victor's penthouse, they prepared a risotto together, opened a bottle of Italian wine, and for a few hours managed to forget the storm brewing around them. It was during dessert that Anania's phone rang. She looked at the screen and her face paled. Helena, she murmured. answering quickly. Victor watched the transformation in her face as she listened. Concern, then alarm, finally determination. "Thanks for letting me know," she said before hanging up. Her eyes met Victor's. "My father is calling a press conference for early tomorrow morning. Helena works as a freelance translator and has been hired for the event." Victor felt his stomach sink. A press conference about what? She doesn't know the details, but she heard mention of corruption and industrial espionage. They stared at each other for a long moment, the same thought crossing their minds. "He's going to expose you," Victor said finally. "He's going to tell about your original mission as a saw and destroy your reputation to get at me." Ania nodded slowly, her face now an impassive mask. "It's the logical move. What you can't conquer, destroy." Lesson number 1 in the Volkov manual. Victor stood up abruptly, walking to the window. "I won't allow it. I won't let him hurt you. There's not much we can do," she replied with surprising calm. "If he tells the truth that he sent me to spy on him and I fell in love with the target, the press will have a field day and any attempt to stop him will only seem like confirmation. Then we'll anticipate it," Victor declared, turning with renewed energy. "We'll tell our version first." Anania raised her eyebrows in surprise. "Our version? The truth, Anania, all of it, without omissions, without distortions." He walked back to the table, sat down, and held her hands. "We'll call our own press conference now, tonight, for tomorrow morning, before his." "Are you serious?" Anaya stared at him in astonishment. "That could destroy your reputation too. Your shareholders." "To hell with the shareholders," Victor interrupted with shared fervor. "I've spent my entire life building an empire, but in the process I lost my soul. I won't lose you too." Anania felt tears burning in her eyes. "Victor, don't listen to me." He continued to gently caress her palm with his thumb. "When you came into my life, even under false pretenses, you brought something I had forgotten existed. Humanity, vulnerability, the ability to feel beyond numbers and contracts. The board will never accept it," she argued weakly. "I'm not asking the board for permission," he replied with a determined smile. "I'm still the majority shareholder, and this is a personal decision." The determination in his eyes was contagious. Hanaya felt a wave of courage wash over her, mixed with something else, a deep feeling that had grown silently, like a stubborn flower in rocky soil. "If we do this," she said finally, "there will be no turning back. We will be declaring open war on my father. We are already at war, Anania. The difference is that now we will fight on our own terms." While Victor made the necessary calls, summoning his public relations team for an emergency meeting, Anania remained by the window, watching the city. Down below, millions of lives went on, oblivious to the drama unfolding above. "Are you ready for this?" Victor asked when he finally finished his calls. Anania turned, her face serene despite the storm raging inside. "All my life, I was Dmitry Volkov's daughter, then his agent, then his traitor. Maybe it's time to just be Ania." Victor approached her, cupping her face in his hands with surprising tenderness for a man known for his toughness in business. "You've always been just for me," he murmured, before sealing her lips with a kiss that contained all the promises that words could not express. That night, as they prepared for the battle that would come at dawn, something changed between them. A silent decision to face whatever fate had in store together, to abandon the masks and armor they had carried for so long. It was terrifying and liberating at the same time, like jumping off a cliff and discovering in mid-fall that perhaps it was possible to fly. The camera flashes were blinding. The buzz of journalists filled the Petrovia Energia auditorium like a restless swarm. Victor adjusted the microphone. His expression was impassive as always, but sitting next to him, she noticed the slight tremor in his hands, a sign of nervousness that no one else would notice. "Good morning, and thank you for coming on such short notice," he began, his deep voice instantly silencing the crowd. "I have called this press conference to share important information about my personal and professional life, before distorted versions circulate in the media." Anania watched the eager faces of the journalists, their pens poised over notepads, their smartphones recording every word. She felt the weight of the moment. Their lives were about to change irrevocably. "Next to me is Ania Volkova. Victor continued, his voice gaining firmness as he went on. She is the daughter of Dmitry Kov, my well-known business rival. A few months ago, I discovered that Ania had been sent by her father to work as an employee in my company with the aim of obtaining privileged information. A shocked murmur ran through the auditorium. Dozens of hands rose with questions, but Victor raised his palm, asking for silence. I ask that you reserve your questions for the end. This is a complex story that deserves to be told in its entirety. In the following minutes, Victor narrated everything. The first meeting, the discovery of Anania's true identity, the unexpected evolution of his feelings, her decision to break with the original mission. He spoke with a sincerity that surprised even Anania, without omitting his own vulnerability in the process. I am aware that this situation seems like something out of a spy movie, he concluded with a slight smile. But the truth is that we are just two people who met under the most unlikely circumstances and discovered something too valuable to sacrifice on the altar of corporate conflicts. A stunned silence followed his words. Then, like a dam bursting, the questions came in an avalanche. Mr. Petrov, how can we believe that Miss Volkova is not continuing to spy on you? Miss Volkova, did you betray your father for love or money? Will this affect the merger with South China Energy? Have the shareholders been informed about this relationship? Victor raised his hand again, restoring order. I will answer some questions, but first I would like Anania to speak for herself. Anania felt the weight of all eyes turning to her. She took a deep breath, adjusting her own microphone. When she began to speak, her voice was clear and firm. I grew up believing that family loyalty was above all else. When my father asked me to spy on Victor Petrov, I saw it as my filial duty. What I didn't expect was to discover a man completely different from the caricature I had been painted. She paused, her eyes briefly meeting Victor's. I didn't plan to fall in love. I didn't plan to question the values I was raised with. But when I realized I was perpetuating a cycle of empty revenge, I had to make a choice. A more aggressive journalist stood up. So you admit to being an industrial spy. That's not a crime. Before Ania could respond, Victor intervened. No confidential information was compromised. We conducted thorough audits and confirmed this. What Ania observed was only personal behavior. Nothing that could harm our shareholders or operations. What about your father, Miss Volkova? Asked a reporter in the front row. How did he react to your change of allegiance? Ania hesitated for just a second. My father is a man who sees the world in black and white, loyalty or betrayal, victory or defeat. He sees my choice as an unforgivable betrayal. It's not, insisted the reporter. The real betrayal, Ania replied calmly. It would be against my own conscience, against what I know to be right. The questions continued for almost an hour, some hostile, some curious, some surprisingly sympathetic. Victor and Anania answered honestly, without rehearsal, sometimes politely disagreeing on details, which only reinforced the authenticity of their account. Finally, an older journalist rose from the back of the room. Mr. Petrov, you have built a reputation as a ruthless businessman. How do you reconcile that image with the man we see today, willing to risk everything for a relationship? The question hung in the air like a perfect musical note. Victor looked first at Anania, then at the journalist. Perhaps I'm not reconciling it, he replied with surprising candor. Perhaps I'm evolving. I spent decades believing that success meant accumulating money, power, influence. It took meeting someone who saw through all my defenses to realize the emptiness of that definition. A respectful silence followed his words. Ania felt a wave of pride, not for the empire he had built, but for his courage to show himself vulnerable before the world. When the press conference ended, they left the stage hand in hand, an image that would be splashed across the front pages of newspapers the next morning. Backstage, the public relations team seemed simultaneously horrified and fascinated by the unfolding events. You realize we just completely rewrote your public narrative, commented Sofia Mendonça, the head of PR, as she led them down a side corridor to avoid more journalists. That was the intention, Victor replied calmly. The board is in a panic. The stock will probably fall temporarily, he agreed. But I prefer an honest decline to stability based on lies. When they finally reached the private parking lot, away from the eyes of the media, Inania allowed herself to relax for the first time in hours. What now? Victor checked his cell phone. My contacts report that your father has canceled his press conference. Of course he did, Ananias said with a tired smile. We stole his moment. He hates not having the first word. That doesn't mean he's given up, Victor warned, opening the car door for her. Just that he needs to recalculate his strategy. As the driver took them back to the penthouse, Ania watched the city through the tinted window. The world outside seemed unchanged, but she knew that nothing would ever be the same. For better or worse, they had chosen a path of no return. Any regrets? Victor asked softly, his fingers intertwined with hers on the leather seat. Anania thought for a moment, then shook her head. None, you. Victor studied her. His blue eyes were softer than she had ever seen them. Just that I never really looked at you before. 6 months cleaning my office, and I never really saw you until that moment in Russian. Ania smiled, leaning her head back on his shoulder. Maybe we weren't ready before. Maybe we needed all these impossible circumstances to truly find each other. The car glided silently through the congested streets of Sao Paulo, carrying two people who had defied fate, logic, and everyone's expectations. What tomorrow would bring was uncertain, but one thing was clear. They would face it together, no longer hidden in the shadows, but in broad daylight, with all their imperfections and contradictions exposed. And strangely, this uncertainty seemed safer than all the fabricated certainties they had lived before. The media explosion was immediate and overwhelming. The next morning, Ania woke up to the sound of a TV station's helicopter hovering near Victor's building. On social media, #OsaMorespiao was already trending worldwide. Her photos, old and recent, real and manipulated, circulated frantically on the internet. This is crazy, she muttered, moving away from the window and returning to bed, where Victor watched the news with an impassive expression. It's the usual media circus, he replied, turning off the TV. It's going to get worse before it gets better. His phone rang. It was Sophia, the PR manager. Conference call with the board in 5 minutes. She informed him without hiding the concern in her voice. They demand your presence. Victor exchanged a glance with Anya. Time to face the court, he said with a resigned smile. While he prepared for the video call in his office, Anania was left alone with her thoughts. She picked up her own cell phone, ignoring the dozens of notifications, and took a deep breath before making a call she had been putting off. Hello? Helena's voice sounded worried on the other end of the line. It's me, Anania replied softly. My God, Anania, you're everywhere. They're calling you the Russian Amatorari on TV. And Anania couldn't help but laugh sadly. Always so dramatic. Are you okay? My father. He canceled everything yesterday, but he's furious. I've never heard him like this. He went back to the hotel and locked himself in with his lawyers. A chill ran down Anania's spine. She knew her father's temper well. The quieter he was, the more dangerous he was. Helena, be careful. Don't get involved in this anymore. Too late, her friend replied with a sigh. I'm your friend. I'm already involved. In fact, she added hesitantly, there's something I need to tell you. Yesterday, before the press conference was canceled, I heard your father on the phone. He mentioned something about a Siberia contract. Anania felt the blood freeze in her veins. Are you sure that's what it was? A Siberia contract? Absolutely. It seemed important. He was very upset. After hanging up, Anania remained motionless, her mind working frantically. The Siberia contract wasn't a document. It was a code used in her father's inner circle, a euphemism for his most extreme contingency plan, reserved for enemies who couldn't be defeated by conventional means. She walked to Victor's office door, hesitating before knocking. On the other side, she could hear his calm voice arguing with the counsel. She decided not to interrupt him. This was a battle he needed to fight alone while she prepared for another, perhaps even more dangerous one. She returned to her room and opened her laptop. With nimble fingers, she accessed an email address she hadn't used in months, her secondary account, the one she used to communicate with contacts in Russia during her mission. There were dozens of unread messages, most from her father demanding reports, then questioning her silence, finally threatening consequences. The most recent message, however, was from another sender. It was from her father's former right-hand man, who had been almost like an uncle to her during her childhood. Ananiah, the message said, your father has activated the Siberia Protocol. Be careful. The shadows have eyes. The message ended with a phone number she didn't recognize. Without hesitation, Hanaya grabbed a prepaid cell phone she kept hidden, a habit from her days as a spy, and she dialed the number. It rang. Mikai's gravelly voice answered after 2 rings. Uncle Mika, she replied in Russian. It's me, Ananiah. The relief in his voice was palpable. Thank God you saw my message. Where are you? Hold on for now, she replied cautiously. What's going on? What is the target of the protocol? There was a tense pause. It's not what, Ananiah. It's who. Your father isn't targeting Petrov's company this time. He's targeting the man himself. Ananiah felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. Explain. Your father hired people to find something compromising on Petrov. Something big enough to destroy him personally. They're combing through every inch of his past in Russia, Europe, America. He won't find anything, Anya replied with more confidence than she felt. Victor, everyone has skeletons in their closet, Anya, he interrupted me gently, especially men who have built empires. After hanging up, Anya sat on the edge of the bed, her brain rapidly processing the implications. Her father had gone to all-out war, no longer against Victor's financial empire, but against the man himself, his reputation, his character, his soul. The door opened and Victor entered, looking exhausted but determined. I survived, he announced with a weary smile. The board is divided, but the majority still supports me. For now, Anya stood up and crossed the room to him. Victor, we need to talk about your past. He raised an eyebrow, surprised. My past, father. She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. My father is looking for something to use against you, something personal, something that could destroy not only your company, but your reputation, your life. Victor studied her for a long moment, his face inscrutable. Then he walked to the window, looking out at the city below. Every man in my position has decisions he would rather not revisit, his low voice finally said. Moments of weakness, questionable choices. I need to know, Ania insisted, moving closer. Not because I doubt you, but because we need to be prepared. Victor turned to face her, his blue eyes piercing as ever. Are you asking me if I have skeletons in my closet, Ananiah? If there's anything your father could use to destroy me, I'm asking if you trust me enough to share your ghosts, she replied softly. As I trusted you with mine? A heavy silence fell between them. Outside, the TV station's helicopter continued its circular flight. The noise of the propellers was a constant reminder of the world watching them, eagerly awaiting the next act of this unlikely drama. Finally, Victor walked over to a small desk in the corner of the room. From a locked drawer, he took out an old folder with edges worn by time. There's a reason I never returned to Russia, Anania, he said, handing her the folder. And it's not just business matters. With trembling hands, Anania took the folder, feeling the weight of the past it contained and the future it could determine. The folder contained old documents, some yellowed by time, newspaper clippings from the Soviet era, black and white photographs, official documents with faded stamps. Ania spent hours absorbing everything, occasionally asking questions that Victor answered with painful honesty. The story that emerged was complex and grim. The young Viktor Petrov, still building his empire in the chaotic 1990s of post-Soviet Russia, had engaged in negotiations with corrupt government officials to secure oil exploration licenses in Siberia. It was not unusual at the time. Virtually all the oligarchs had built their fortunes in similar circumstances. But Victor had gone further to secure a crucial contract. He had provided information about a competitor, information that led to this man's arrest on charges of treason. A year later, the man had died in prison under suspicious circumstances. His name was Leonid Yashin, Victor said, his voice heavy with remorse. I never knew that the information I passed on would be used to falsely incriminate him. I thought it was just a corporate power game. You were young, Ania replied softly. Those were different times. That doesn't absolve the guilt, Victor retorted, his eyes distant. For years, I tried to convince myself that I wasn't responsible for his death, that the authorities would have found another way to get him. But deep down, and Nia covered his hand with hers. That's why you never came back. Victor nodded slowly. The case was never completely solved. With the political changes, it could be reopened at any moment. And there are powerful people who would prefer it to remain buried, including you. Anania observed without judgment in her voice. Including me, Victor agreed, or at least the man I was. Now he sighed deeply. Now I'm not sure who I am. And Anaya carefully put the documents back in the folder. If my father finds out about this, it will be the end, Victor added simply. Not only of my company, but possibly of my freedom. There are extradition treaties, international courts. A heavy silence fell between them. Outside, night had swallowed Sao Paulo, the city lights creating an artificial constellation that stretched to the horizon. What will we do? Asked Ania. Finally, Victor studied her intently. We'll do it. Don't ask me why I didn't tell you before. Aren't you thinking about how similar I am to the monster your father painted? We all have ghosts, Victor, she replied, holding his face in her hands. We all carry burdens we would rather abandon. What matters is not who we were, but who we choose to be now. His eyes filled with an emotion he rarely allowed himself to show. How can you look at me like that, knowing what I've done? The same way you looked at me when you found out I was a spy sent to destroy you, she replied simply, seeing beyond the act to the person. Victor pulled her toward him, embracing her with an almost painful intensity, as if he feared she might disappear at any moment. I don't deserve you, he murmured against her hair. It's not a question of deserving, she replied. It's a question of choosing. And I choose you, Victor Petrov, with all your mistakes, all your scars. When they finally parted, something had changed between them. A new intimacy born not of passion, but of shared vulnerability, of mutual recognition of flaws and acceptance of them. If my father discovers these documents, said Anania, pointing to the folder, he will hesitate to use them. I know that, agreed Victor. The question is how he could find out. These are the only physical records I keep for security. Anania bit her lip thoughtfully. There are people in Russia who know, people who were involved. Most are dead or missing. The few who remain have as much to lose as I do if the story comes out. What about Asim's family, his wife, his children? Victor looked away, the guilt visible on his face. Helena passed away 5 years ago. Cancer. Their son Alexei lives in London. I've been watching from a distance, making sure they never lack anything financially. Without them knowing, Anania added, understanding how I could get closer to them. What would I say? Sorry for indirectly causing your father's death? Hanaya didn't respond immediately, absorbing the complexity of the situation. Finally, she said, if my father is looking for something against you, Alexei and Ashain would be a natural avenue to pursue. Victor's eyes widened with realization. You think he would go after Leonid's son? It's what I would do, Anaya replied with the candor that had become characteristic between them. He would follow every loose thread, every personal connection, and a family tragedy has the perfect emotional appeal to destroy a reputation. Victor stood up abruptly, walking to the window. Then it's only a matter of time. Unless Anania, he hesitated, an idea forming in his mind. Unless we do something my father would never expect. What? Victor turned, intrigued, and Anaya stood up, joining him at the window. Outside, the city looked like a vast illuminated chessboard, with millions of pieces moving in complex patterns. What if, instead of waiting for him to find Alexei and Shim, we found him first? Victor stared at her, perplexed. For what? To bribe him? To silence him? I'm not that man anymore, Anania. No. She held his hands, her eyes shining with determination, to do what should have been done decades ago, to ask for forgiveness. The proposal hung between them like a rope stretched over an abyss, dangerous, precarious, but possibly the only way to the other side. Forgiveness, Victor repeated, the word feeling strange on his lips. Do you really believe that's possible? I don't know, Nania replied honestly, but I do know that running away from ghosts has never brought peace to anyone. And if there's one thing I've learned in these troubled months, it's that sometimes the bravest path is also the most dangerous. Victor studied his face for a long moment, as if searching for the strength he couldn't find in himself. Then he slowly nodded. London, he said simply. We need to go to London. As they made plans for the journey that could seal their fates, neither of them noticed a small drone hovering silently outside the window. Its high-resolution cameras captured every moment of their intimate conversation. Crowville International Airport was bustling with activity when Victor and Anania landed after their long flight from Sao Paulo. They were exhausted not only from the trip, but from the constant tension of the last few days, the emergency meetings with lawyers, the temporary delegation of business, and especially the mental preparation for the confrontation that awaited them. I still can't believe we're doing this, Victor muttered as they waited in line at immigration. Anania gently squeezed his hand. It's the right thing to do. The right thing, he repeated with a sigh. After 20 years of cowardice, it's not cowardice to protect yourself, she replied. It's survival instinct. The conversation was interrupted when they reached the immigration officer. Victor handed over his passport, trying to appear casual, even though his heart was racing. Since the press conference, his face had been splashed across newspapers and news sites around the world. Recognition was practically inevitable. Mr. Petrov, said the officer, looking up from the passport with a flash of recognition. Welcome to the United Kingdom. Business or pleasure? Personal matters, Victor replied succinctly. The officer nodded, stamped his passport, and returned it with a professional smile. Enjoy your stay. A driver was waiting for them at the airport exit. It wasn't the luxury service Victor would normally use, but it was a discreet arrangement made through trusted contacts who didn't want to attract unnecessary attention. To the hotel first, the driver asked as he stowed their bags in the trunk. Victor exchanged a glance with Ania. Both were tired from the trip, but their anxiety outweighed their fatigue. No, he finally replied, to the address I sent you earlier in Notting Hill. During the drive through London traffic, Ania watched Victor out of the corner of her eye. His face was tense, the lines around his eyes more pronounced than usual. Occasionally, his right hand drummed nervously on his knee, a gesture she rarely saw in him. He may not be home, she commented softly, trying to ease the tension. Part of me hopes he isn't, Victor admitted. We could have called ahead and given him a chance to refuse. No. Victor looked out the window, observing the London cityscape. I need to look him in the eye, Ania, even if it's just to see the hatred I deserve. The car finally stopped in front of a well-maintained Victorian building, painted a shade of blue, with flowers in the windows. It wasn't the kind of residence they would have expected. It looked cozy, domestic, full of life. Are we waiting here? Asked the driver. Yes, replied Victor, taking a deep breath before getting out of the car. We don't know how long this will take. Anya got out right behind him, adjusting her coat against the cold London wind. Together they climbed the few steps to the door and rang the bell. Long seconds passed. Victor was about to ring again when the door opened, revealing a man of about 35 with dark hair and intensely blue eyes. Eyes surprisingly similar to Victor's own, a coincidence that seemed to disturb them both. Can I help you? Asked the man in impeccable British English, without a trace of a Russian accent. Victor was momentarily speechless. Anya noticed his discomfort and took a small step forward. Mr. Yashin, Alexei Yashin, she said in English. The man frowned, instant suspicion in his eyes. Who is asking? Victor finally found his voice. My name is Victor Petrov. I knew your father, Leonid, many years ago in Russia. The transformation in Alexei's face was immediate and dramatic. His eyes widened in recognition, then narrowed with a restrained fury that made his next words even more disturbing because they were spoken in a controlled tone. I know exactly who you are, he said, every word like a sharp blade. What I don't know is how you have the audacity to show up at my door after everything you've done. Victor didn't flinch, though Ania could feel the impact of the words on him. I have no apologies to offer, Mr. Yashim. Only the truth if you're willing to hear it. The truth? Alexei laughed bitterly. 20 years later, when my father is dead and buried. Please, Ania interjected softly. Just a few minutes of your time. Alexei studied her, truly noticing her for the first time. And you are Ania Volkova. Recognition flashed in his eyes again. Dmitry Volkov's daughter, the spy who fell in love with the target. You two are celebrities now, you know? Even here in London, it's all anyone talks about. He hesitated for a long moment, clearly torn. Finally, with a resigned sigh, he opened the door wider. 15 minutes, he said firmly. Not because you deserve it, but because I may need closure myself. The living room they were led into was cozy and obviously the home of a family. Colorful toys were organized in one corner, and photographs of smiling children decorated the walls. On a prominent shelf, a single black and white photograph, a middle-aged man with the same piercing eyes as Alexei. My wife took the kids to the park, Alexei commented, following Victor's gaze to the toys. Maybe it's better this way. They sat down, a heavy silence falling over them. Victor stared at Leonid's photograph as if seeking courage in it. I don't know where to start, he finally admitted. The beginning would be appropriate, Alexei replied dryly. The day you decided my father's life was worth less than an oil contract, Victor, you didn't look away. I never meant for him to die. I never imagined that the information I provided would be used to falsely incriminate him. But you provided the information anyway, Alexei insisted, knowing it would be used against him in some way. Yes, Victor admitted, his voice low but firm. I can't deny that. Alexei leaned forward, his eyes shining with restrained emotion. Do you know what it's like to grow up without a father, Mr. Petrov? Do you know what it's like to visit a Siberian prison at age 12? To see your hero wasting away behind bars? Do you know what it's like to hear your mother cry every night? Each word was a precise stab, but Victor did not flinch. No, I don't. And it would be an offense to pretend I can imagine your pain. Then why are you here? Alexei demanded. Because now, after all these years, it was Ania who answered, her voice gentle but direct. Because the past has finally caught up with him. Because living with this secret has brought no peace to anyone. And because maybe it's time for everyone to move on. You, Victor, even your father. My father is dead, Alexei retorted bitterly. Yes, she agreed, but his memory lives on in you, in your children. And perhaps that memory deserves the whole truth, not just the version you grew up knowing. Alexei studied her for a long moment, something subtly changing in his expression. You really love him, he finally said, a statement, not a question. Even though you know who he is, what he did. I love the man he has become, Anaya replied simply. The man who had the courage to face his past, even though he knew he could lose everything in the process. A contemplative silence followed her words. Victor stared at his own hands, as if he could see the weight of his past choices in them. I didn't come here to ask for forgiveness, Miriam, he finally said, raising his eyes to face Alexei. I don't have that right. I came to offer the truth, however painful it may be. He hesitated briefly. I came to offer compensation, even though I know no amount of money can make up for it. Alexei interrupted, indignation clear in his voice. Do you think I came to London to build a life, a family, just to be bought off in the end? That's not it, Ania quickly interjected. This isn't about buying silence or forgiveness. It's about justice as far as possible. Before Alexei could respond, the front door opened and the sound of cheerful children's voices filled the room. His face changed instantly, the protective father overpowering the vengeful son. Lisa, he called toward the hallway, we have unexpected visitors. Could you take the children upstairs for a moment? An attractive young woman appeared in the living room doorway, looking curiously at the visitors. Two small children peered out from behind her, a boy of about 5 and a girl a little older. Of course, she replied, studying the situation with obvious concern. Is everything all right? Yes, Alexei assured her, his tone now softer. Just a conversation I need to finish. When the family disappeared upstairs, Alexei turned to the visitors. His gaze was different now, no longer just anger, but also contemplation. I have a good life here, he said finally, far from Russia, far from the past. My children will never know the world I grew up in, the system that destroyed my father. It is my greatest triumph over those dark times. Victor nodded silently, understanding the depth of what Alexei was saying. What exactly do you hope to achieve with this visit, Mr. Petrov? Alexei finally asked. The truth, Victor replied simply. First between us, and then, if you so choose, to the world. I didn't come here to protect my reputation or my empire. I came because It was the right thing to do, even if it's 20 years too late. The sincerity in his voice was undeniable. Alexei stared at the man before him, no longer the powerful oligarch, but just a human being confronting the mistakes of his past. "And if I decide to make this story public?" he asked, testing him. "If you decide to expose everything you've done, then I'll accept the consequences," Victor replied without hesitation, as he should have done long ago. At that moment, Anania's cell phone vibrated. She looked at the screen and paled visibly. "What is it?" Victor asked, noticing her expression. Anania looked up, the shock evident on her face. "It's my father," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "He's here in London," she added, turning the screen so Victor could see. "He knows exactly where we are." They didn't have to wait long. 15 minutes after Dmitry Volkov's message, a black limousine pulled up in front of the Zion residence. Anya watched from the living room window, every line of her body tense with attention. "He came alone," she remarked, surprise evident in her voice. Alexei Yin, who had decided to stay with them after sending his wife and children to a neighbor's house as a precaution, approached the window. "Is this Dmitry Volkov, the Russian oligarch?" "My father," Anya confirmed, her tone a complex mixture of love and resignation. When the doorbell rang, it was Alexei who stepped forward to answer it. Victor and Anania remained in the living room, both standing as if they needed the physical posture to face what was to come. Dmitry Volkov entered the room like a restrained storm, his presence instantly filling the space. At 65, he was still an imposing man, with perfectly trimmed gray hair, in a suit that had surely cost more than many cars. His eyes quickly scanned Victor, then settled on his daughter. Something softened momentarily in his gaze. "Anania," she said simply. "Father," she replied, maintaining her composure. "How did you find us?" A cold smile touched Volkov's lips. "Did you really believe I wouldn't keep watch on you after all?" "You sent the drone," Victor concluded, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. "You watched us in my apartment." Volkov turned to face him directly. "Wonderful technology, small, silent, equipped with high-definition lip readers." "So you know why we're here," Victor observed, showing no surprise or fear. "I know you've finally decided to face your dark past," Volkov replied, walking slowly around the room, examining the family photographs on the walls. He paused in front of Leonidin's photograph. "I must admit, I didn't expect this fascinating move." Alexei, who had been watching the scene with growing tension, finally spoke up. "I don't know what game you're playing, but this is my home, and my family is in danger because of you." Volkov turned to him, studying him with genuine interest. "Senator Yashin, I presume, the son of the man he pointed to Victor, helped send to his death." "Father?" Anania exclaimed, horrified by the deliberate cruelty. Volkov raised his hand, silencing her. "Why pretend civility now? We are all here for the same reason. The truth which coincidentally I have in the hands of your impeccable toothpick." He pulled out a small flash drive. "Here, Mr. Ian, are all the details of the conspiracy that killed your father. Names, dates, amounts paid, all meticulously documented by contacts I maintained in the FSB." Alexei stared at the small object as if it were a snake about to strike. "Why would you give me this?" "Because it's not me you hate," Volkov replied softly. "It's him. And with this, you can finally have your revenge." The room fell into absolute silence. The air seemed heavy, laden with decades of hurt, betrayal, and pain. It was Victor who broke the silence. His voice was surprisingly calm and firm. "Senor Yashim," he said, turning to Alexei, completely ignoring Volkov. "I came here today to offer the truth. Not the truth as dictated or partial, but the whole truth, however painful it may be for me. What your father suffered was unforgivable, and my role in it is a stain I will carry forever." Volkov laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "How touching, Petrov, the confession of a repentant sinner." Victor continued, still speaking directly to Alexei. "I do not ask for your forgiveness. I have no right to, but I offer complete transparency and a willingness to face whatever consequences you deem appropriate." Alexei looked from the flash drive in Volkov's hand to Victor, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. "Why should I believe you now?" It was Ania who stepped forward, placing herself between her father and Victor. He didn't need to come here, she said softly. He could have run away, hidden, used his money and power to protect himself, as he had done for decades. But he chose to face the past, knowing he could lose everything. Volkov looked at his daughter with a mixture of admiration and frustration. You really believe in him, don't you? In his redemption? I believe in the human capacity to change, Father. Anaya replied, looking him straight in the eye. Even yours. A heavy silence fell over the room. Alexei looked at the flash drive in his hand, then at his father's photograph on the wall. When he spoke, his voice was charged with quiet determination. For 20 years, I lived with a hole in my heart where the truth about what happened to my father should have been. I built my life far from Russia, far from the memories, trying to protect my family from the past. He walked to the window, briefly observing the street outside where children played oblivious to adult dramas. Then he turned, facing the three of them. What will I gain from this belated revenge? Justice for my father. He is still dead. Peace for my mother. She's gone. Personal satisfaction. He shook his head slowly, or just more years consumed by hatred, by the search for retribution. Volkov took a step forward, his expression incredulous. Are you considering letting him go after all he's done? Alexei looked at the oligarch with surprising calm. What you offer, Mr. Volkov, is not justice. It is just another form of revenge. Your revenge, not mine. He destroyed my company, stole the legacy that would have been my daughter's. Look where it has brought us, Alexei replied, pointing around. There is a room full of wounded people, carrying scars from decades, perpetuating an endless cycle of retaliation. Anania watched her father closely. For the first time, she noticed something she had never seen before. Genuine vulnerability behind the facade of power. An aging man who had devoted years of his life to revenge, only to see his own daughter choose the enemy's side. What do you want me to do with this? Alexei asked, holding up the flash drive. The truth must be known, Volkov insisted. Petrov must face the consequences. And you? Alexei asked softly. What are your motivations, Mr. Volkov? Justice for a man you never even knew, or simply destroying your business rival? The question hung in the air like smoke. Volkov did not answer immediately, his gaze meeting his daughter's. Something silent and complex passed between them. Father, Anania said softly, enough, please. To everyone's surprise, including her own, she saw her father's eyes moisten slightly. When your mother died, Volkov said quietly in a lower voice, I promised I would protect you and your future. Everything I built, every move I made, was with that in mind. I know, Anania replied, approaching him cautiously, but Dad, I don't need you to fight my battles. I need you to respect my choices. Victor watched the scene with silent respect, realizing he was witnessing something rare. A glimpse of the man behind the myth, the father behind the oligarch. You two, Alexei said finally, looking at Victor and Volkov, came to my house today, bringing your battles, your grudges, your power games, one seeking redemption, the other revenge. But neither of you really asked me what I want. He walked over to a small desk in the corner of the room and opened a drawer from which he took a yellowed envelope. This is the last letter my father wrote from prison a few days before he died. I've never shown it to anyone. With reverent care, he removed the sheet of paper covered with tight Cyrillic handwriting. His eyes scanned the words as if he were rereading them for the 1000th time. He wrote, My son, when hatred knocks on your door, don't invite it in. It is a guest that devours its host from within. To forgive is not to forget, but to choose not to be consumed. The silence that followed was almost palpable. Victor closed his eyes briefly, the magnitude of those words hitting him like a physical blow. Alexei carefully placed the letter back in the envelope. I spent years ignoring that advice, feeding my resentment as if it were a pet. But when my children were born, I began to understand what my father really wanted for me. He approached Victor, his eyes so similar to his father's, fixed on his. I can't say I forgive you, Mr. Petrov. Not completely, maybe never, but I can choose not to be consumed by what happened. Then, in a gesture no one expected, he handed the flash drive back to Volkov. The past belongs to the past. My children deserve a father who looks forward, not backward. Volkov did not take the flash drive immediately. His gaze shifted from Alexei to Enya and finally to Victor. It was the look of a man recalculating decades of strategies, reevaluating a lifetime of certainties. "Do you really love her?" he asked Victor abruptly. The question took everyone by surprise with its direct simplicity. Victor didn't hesitate. "More than I thought I was capable of loving anyone." Volkov nodded slowly as if confirming something to himself. Finally, he took the flash drive back. "Do you know why I sent Anya to spy on you, Petrov?" "To obtain information that could destroy me," Victor replied without rancor, merely stating a fact. "Partially," Volkov admitted. "But also because after studying you for years, I knew she was the only person who could see beyond the facade you had built, the only one who could find the man behind the myth." Anaya looked at her father in astonishment. "You planned this?" An enigmatic smile touched Volkov's lips. "I planned the approach. The rest happened as it was meant to happen." He walked to the window, watching the London sky begin to darken. "I spent so much time obsessed with what Petrov took from us that I never considered what he could give." "What do you mean?" Ania asked, confused. Volkov turned to face them. "A partner worthy of you, Anania. Someone who could challenge you, understand you. Someone with whom you could build something greater than the legacy I would leave behind." The silence that followed was thick with unspoken possibilities, with truths too complex to be expressed in simple words. Finally, Volkov looked at Victor, all previous hostility replaced by something more nuanced. Certainly not friendship, but perhaps the beginning of a truce. "If you hurt her," he said simply, "nowhere on earth will be safe for you." Victor nodded, accepting both the threat and the implicit blessing it contained. Alexei watched the scene with an expression that mixed perplexity and relief. "Ah, so that's how it ended." "Nothing really ends," replied Volkov, putting the flash drive in his pocket. "But some things can start again." He looked at the photograph of Leonid, then at his son. "He would be proud of the man you have become." On the way back to the hotel, the silence in the taxi was comfortable, almost meditative. Anania rested her head on Victor's shoulder, both absorbing the extraordinary events of that day. "Your father is an amazing man," Victor commented. "Finally." Hania smiled. "Like all of us, he's more complex than he appears. Do you think he really planned to bring us together?" She considered the question for a moment. "Not in the way it turned out, but my father always saw several moves ahead. Maybe he saw possibilities even he didn't expect." Victor intertwined his fingers with hers. "What now?" "We go back to Sao Paulo, face the press, the shareholders, the board." "Now," replied Ananyai, lifting her face to look at me, "in our eyes we live our own story, not the one others have written for us." Outside, London sparkled under the night sky, millions of lights reflecting on the dark waters of the Thames. A world of possibilities opened up before them. Not perfect or without challenges, but one in which they could finally walk as themselves without the weight of secrets or false identities. Two unlikely people, from seemingly irreconcilable worlds, had found in each other something that transcended borders, languages, social classes, and old rivalries. They had found the courage to choose love in a world that valued power, status, and revenge. As the taxi wound its way through the brightly lit streets of the city, Victor thought about the extraordinary journey that had brought them there. From a simple question, whispered in Russian, to an invisible street cleaner, to this moment of clarity and possibility. All because, for the first time in decades, someone had seen beyond the layers of protection he had built around his wounded heart. "Kitu mina pulubitadeng," he whispered, repeating the question that had started it all. Hania smiled, snuggling closer to him. "Shot," she replied softly, completing the circle, because in the end it was not geographical or social boundaries that they had crossed, but the most challenging boundaries of all, those that separated one human heart from another, built with bricks of fear, mistrust, and past experiences. And having crossed that boundary once, they knew that they would never again live completely isolated within themselves.